Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to investigate a truly fascinating ancient mystery tucked away in Chapter 2 of the Book of Esther. We're going behind the scenes of what looks like just regular political history to find the hidden director, the unseen hand orchestrating the whole show from behind the curtain. You see, this isn't just some dusty old text, it's a masterclass in power dynamics, survival, and mind-blowing divine timing. Let's just dive right into the Persian court and see what's really going on.
Okay, let's unpack a core paradox that is just incredibly captivating. The central message of Esther is essentially this: God hides himself, but he controls absolutely everything. Think about how wild that is for a second. We're dealing with a revered religious text, right? But from the very first page to the very last, God's name isn't explicitly mentioned even a single time. Total silence. Yet the deeper you dig beneath the surface of these historical events, the more you realize that the hidden director's fingerprints are literally everywhere. What seems like random coincidence, it's actually calculated inevitability.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this story, it helps to compare it to another famous biblical text, the Book of Ruth. If you know Ruth, you know the focus is super intimate. It highlights a microscopic, hidden providence working within one single family in a tiny village. But Esther completely flips the script and zooms all the way out. We're talking macro scale here. We get a front-row seat to the hidden providence, ensuring the survival of an entire nation across a massive, multi-continental empire.
Now, as the narrative unfolds, there's a really striking 4-year gap in the timeline that we just can't ignore. In the 3rd year of his reign, King Ahasuerus actually deposed Queen Vashti in a massive fit of rage. But Esther isn't brought into the palace until year 7. So what happened in the middle? Well, history tells us that during those 4 blank years, this highly arrogant king launched a disastrous military campaign against Greece. He got completely humiliated and came home with his ego totally crushed. This historical context is the perfect explanation for why, after falling from such heights, his anger finally cooled off and why he suddenly, desperately needs a new queen.
And this brings us to a deeply ironic twist: the absolute helplessness of a supreme monarch. I mean, this guy sits on the most powerful throne in the known world, and yet he's completely trapped. Once his anger subsides, he actually starts feeling this lingering regret and longing for Vashti. But guess what? This high and mighty ruler suddenly finds himself entirely powerless against the very legal system he and his ancestors built. He's literally become a prisoner of his own absolute power.
What makes this dynamic so fascinating is just how rigid Persian law actually was. In this empire, any decree written in the king's name and sealed with his signet ring was a done deal. Permanent. No takesy-backsies, not even for the king who issued it. It's an inflexible, almost absurd legal trap, and it meant Vashti's removal was historically irreversible. But here's the kicker. Beneath the surface, this seemingly impossible obstacle is exactly what clears the stage. It totally wipes the slate clean, making absolute room for our new protagonist to step into the spotlight. So, to fill this royal vacancy, and let's be honest, to soothe the king's bruised ego, his ministers pitch an ambitious empire-wide operation. The plan is to appoint commissioners in every single province, round up all the beautiful young virgins, bring them to the royal harem, and let the king take his pick. This is way more than just a beauty contest. It's a sweeping political mandate. These ministers think they're just cleverly flattering their boss, right? They are completely unaware that they are unwittingly acting as agents for a much, much greater divine plan.
Right as this ruthless imperial machine revs up, the true underdogs of our story quietly make their entrance. We're talking about orphans and exiles. Just imagine their reality for a moment. They're living miles away from their homeland, stripped of absolutely all political power, and entirely vulnerable to the erratic whims of a massive empire. Set against the backdrop of this absolute imperial authority, they are completely powerless, totally marginalized, and completely at the mercy of the state.
But let's look closer, because Mordecai isn't your average exile. He's an Orthodox Jew, following in the footsteps of ancestors taken captive by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And what's truly remarkable here is the specific call-out of his genealogy as a Benjamite. You guys, this is not just a casual detail. It directly connects him to a centuries-old unfinished blood feud from Israel's history, the one between the Benjamite king Saul and the Amalekite Agag. It's a brilliant, deadly foreshadowing of his eventual life-or-death clash with Haman that's going to happen later in the story.
Then we have our female lead Esther, whose Hebrew name is Hadassah. As an orphan who lost both parents, she was taken in by her cousin Mordecai. She has 0 natural protectors, no powerful family name, and she's basically at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Yet, she gets swept right up into this terrifying imperial machine for one single reason: her striking physical beauty. She literally has no leverage and no right to say no. She's just passively thrust into the very center of a historical storm.
This setup creates this incredibly stark contrast that just screams the deep dramatic tension and irony of the whole narrative. On one hand, you have the most vulnerable, helpless orphan girl from a conquered minority group. On the other hand, the doors opening up to her belong to the absolute center of global imperial power. It is a completely absurd mismatch. But, this is exactly how the hidden director loves to turn the wheels of history, using the most unlikely vessels to pull off monumental missions.
Now, to bridge this massive, seemingly impossible gap in power and class, the hidden director doesn't rely on earth-shattering miracles. No thunderbolts from the sky here. Instead, behind the heavily guarded walls of the palace, the entire orchestration relies on a very minor, easily overlooked character to set the whole thing into motion.
Enter Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. He takes a series of unbelievable, totally unprecedented actions. Think about it. This is a man who has seen countless beautiful women, yet he inexplicably favors Esther right from the very start. He immediately fast-tracks her special beauty treatments, handpicks 7 dedicated maids just for her, and upgrades her to the most luxurious suite in the harem. Before Esther even meets the king, this minor official unknowingly acts as the executor of hidden grace, miraculously paving her golden path to the throne.
But it's not all glitz and glamour. Surviving in a royal environment packed with dangerous political calculations requires strict discipline. Esther absolutely must adhere to one critical rule, and it's going to become her ultimate law for survival. She has to keep her true identity completely hidden. In this gilded cage, letting slip the wrong background could easily cost her her life.
Mordecai gives her a strict command to keep her Jewish heritage an absolute secret. This instruction was probably born out of a father's protective instinct, but it actually establishes the core suspense of the entire book. Just think about it. If she had exposed her identity the second she walked into the palace, the epic rescue mission that follows would have been totally impossible. This deliberate act of hiding perfectly mirrors God's own hidden providence, flawlessly setting the stage for her to save her people when the timing is exactly right. Just picture this deeply moving scene. Outside the grand, imposing walls of the Persian palace, Mordecai paces anxiously in front of the harem courtyard every single day. He is desperate to know if Esther is safe. Standing there in the shadow of imperial power, he's completely powerless as an outsider. Yet he stubbornly, silently watches over his vulnerable adopted daughter. It's this fierce parental love that injects such a warm, heartbreaking humanity into what is otherwise a grand historical narrative. So, when we step back and look at all of this, the unbelievable timing, the utter helplessness of a supreme king, the minor characters acting totally out of nowhere, and the meticulous setup of every little event, it really forces us to look at the unexplainable coincidences in our own lives. We have to pause and ask ourselves a profoundly deep question. In the events of your own life, is there a hidden providence at work? Behind the random setbacks and the unexpected helpers, is there a hidden director quietly pulling the strings, guiding you toward a much greater purpose? That is absolutely a thought worth chewing on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.